Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Crime Time on A Mighty Blaze. It is Tuesday. It is 4 p.m. where I am at least, but not where our guest is, and more about that in a minute. I am your host for the day, Hank Phillippi Ryan, the USA Today bestselling author of 13 going on 14 novels of suspense. My current book is Her Perfect Life, which is casually displayed on the door behind me, and that soon will be replaced by The House Guest, my new book that's coming out in February, which is sort of Gaslight meets Thelma and Louise. But we will talk about that more, because today, though, I want to talk to you about Luca Veste's new book, You Never Said Goodbye. And this is absolutely the twistiest, turniest, emotional, surprising, riveting, with one of the baddest of the bad guys I've ever read, and one of the sweetest of the good guys I've ever read. So we can talk more about that. Look, the people are pouring in. There's Sherry is here, and Renee is here. Sherry Brown is here, and Lynn is here, and talking as fast as I possibly can. Shannon Hansen is here. But we are welcoming from Liverpool, the marvelous Luca Veste. As I said, we are talking about his book, You Never Said Goodbye. And where you are in Liverpool, it is what time, Luca?
It's just come up to 9:05 in the evening. So not too bad. Not too bad. It'll get later. This is the earliest I've ever done an event in that stateside, so that's good for me, because I've been on Zoom at 3:00 in the morning before now.
Yeah, I wonder about that. I mean, I was thinking that it's 4:00 here. That's sort of 9:00. That's a doable thing. But when it gets to be 8:00 here or 9:00 here, you're just trying to stay awake.
It's fine. I mean, it's I'm not going to start complaining about my diamond shoes being too tight, having to do events for the US. That's brilliant for me. But I don't mind it at all, because it kind of seemed to kick in over the last few years, is that we were able to do more events like this, where it's we can kind of reach a wider audience without leaving my own home. That's a fantastic feat of technology for me. So I love it. I don't mind it at all.
I think it's amazing. The pandemic has been so hideous and terrible, but the idea that you and I can just chat,
Exactly.
and you're in Liverpool and I'm in Boston, and it doesn't seem like a problem. And then all these people, Shannon and Renee and Sherry and Deborah Press is here, and Anissa is here, and Shannon is saying it's 1:05 here on the West Coast. So they're just getting ready to have lunch. It is really great. And it has brought us together. And speaking of bringing us together, today is your pub day for You Never Said Goodbye. I know this isn't your first pub day, but does it ever get old?
No. Every time it's a pinch our moment, because it's kind of the culmination of a long period of time. So, because I started writing this book 3 years ago, and to see it come to fruition, and this is like it's almost like the sigh of relief. Now it's out, and it did have that earlier this year when it came out over here in the UK, but I always had this as well to look forward. It kind of extends that period as well. So this is like my 8th novel. It's my 4th that has been published in the US, and yeah, it never gets old, and I hope and I don't think it ever will, because this is just the most incredible job that I've ever had. I'm never going to take it for granted. That I get to do this, as for a living. It's not what I ever expected to do, but that's why every time when it comes around to these days, it's a real, I wake up in the morning and go, this is a good day. This is a good day. I get to see it out there and people talking about it, and yeah, it's fantastic. I love it.
I love the idea that you just said it's not what you intended to do. What did you intend to do?
Oh, I failed at numerous different professions before I became a writer. I was a massive reader as a child. I come from a very underprivileged background. My parents weren't even working class, because they never worked. So we call them council estates in the UK. I'm not entirely sure what we called in the States, but very impoverished. It was very poor background, but we had a library close by, and so reading was always part of my life. But what a lot of people from where I came from went on to do with very few things, and that was You tried to be a footballer, soccer player. You wanted to be a boxer. You tried to stay out of prison, or you ended up in a dead end job where you didn't really enjoy, and you hoped to make it to 70, and that would have been a good life. And I tried all of those things. I tried to be a soccer player. I tried to be a boxer, failed at those two things. Tried to be an actor, failed at that. I was in bands, thinking that, well, the Beatles came from here, so that, maybe that magic, that didn't work out. And yeah, so I kind of just fell into a job when I left school quite early, and never thought that this would be something I could. I didn't think that people like me could do things like, could write. I thought it was people who, came from a lot of money, who lived in castles, and, that was their life. And I didn't think it was open for people like me. And it wasn't until I didn't write a word when I was a child. I wasn't one of those kids who wrote stories in school. I didn't write my first short story until I think it's about 11 years ago now, when I was about 28. And it was quite by accident that I did it. It was just a kind of jokey conversation I was having on Facebook, of all places, where someone dared me to write a short story, and I just did.
So wait a minute. Let me just interrupt you for 1 second, because there's just so many things that you just said that I'm just dying to know more about. And hang on to that thought for a second. I just want to look over here. When I look over here, you all, I'm looking at the comments, and I see Thomas Shevlin from Scotland, and Renee is here, and so many more people are coming. Diane is here. Marvelous. Let's go back, because I loved, and I'll introduce the show in a minute, and I'll introduce Luca in a minute, and all those things that I have to do for housekeeping in a minute. But let's just keep talking. You said that there were libraries, and that's where you got books. And you were also talking about the sort of bleak future for kids who lived in situations like yours. Were you aware of that bleak future, that there was something to compare it to? And how did what you learned in books affect that, if it did?
So it was kind of the norm. So you didn't expect, it was that like the idea of expectation didn't really enter my head. It was just like, you were doing well if you got to the end of the week, or you got to the end of the day without anything kind of happening. That was kind of what you expected. So it's not like, you weren't thinking big time over, if you. So you would always know the friend of a friend, or the cousin who lived around the corner, who, had trials for major, that kind of thing, and you would think, oh, that, if I became a soccer player, that would be amazing, because then that would be, but you never really expected it. But the library was so important for me, because it did give me an insight into a world that I had absolutely no kind of concept of. I was a massive reader of Enid Blyton. I went through all the famous five and the Secret Seven, but she had a series called Mallory Towers, which was all about boarding schools. And I'm about 7 or 8 years old, maybe 9 at this point. I had no idea about the concept of what a boarding school was. I didn't know what one was. We had our state schools, and that was it. I didn't know what, because it was so outside of my, kind of cultural kind of area. I'd never heard of them before. So reading about that was kind of eye-opening, because it was like, okay, there are families that will send their children away to school during, term time and things like that. And that, instead of me just going, I don't want to learn more about that, it made me want to know more about that. And I've always been that way, is I've always wanted to learn as much as possible. I was a curious child, and I think that's kind of kept going into my adulthood.
I do. I love that. I think that a lot of authors are curious. I think that's why we write stories, is that we want to find out what happens.
Yeah.
And the only way we can find out what happens is to write the story. I was talking to Janice Hallett. Do you know Janice Hallett, who wrote, the Twyford Affair?
Yeah, I've met her. I want to, because I love those books. I think they're fantastic.
Well, she loves Enid Blyton too, and she was talking about growing up with the Enid Blyton books too, which are a little bit being looked at in a different way these days, but were just as formative as Nancy Drew was to me. Again, Nancy Drew is being looked at very differently these days too, but it mattered for us when we read them that there were kids who were smart and confident and brave and took risks and could do things on their own.
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of, it's kind of how, like, I kind of lived with that kind of bravery. And I think I did absorb that from those stories. You know, it was like the famous five with five kids who were trying to just, okay, the mysteries weren't like, like there's a serial killer on, on Kirin Island. It was smaller mysteries, but they were still willing and wanting to kind of discover what the answer was in that instance.
Yeah.
And that was always in me, is that I kind of always wants to discover these things. And I think that is key to being especially a crime writer, is that it's unlocking those kind of secrets and mysteries that kind of drives us. I think is like, is we may hear a snippet of an idea or a story or a character, and then we want to know more about them. And I think that's what we kind of always bring into our work.
And and on the days that it's great, it is the best thing there ever was. And on the days that it's difficult, it's still the best thing there ever was, because there'll be a good day next. Let me just stop to say that you all, if you have just joined us, and I see that the comments are pouring in right now. Janine Woodworth says, I wanted to live in the library growing up. Yeah. And Diane says, libraries were my safe haven. Yes, absolutely so. And I'll bet that so many people in the comments, as well as so many authors, have that same connection. My sister and I used to ride our ponies to the library where I grew up. So that was pretty funny. So anyway, we're talking about You Never Said Goodbye today by Luca Veste. And you have found us here on Crime Time on A Mighty Blaze. A Mighty Blaze was started, if you are new, and I do see some new names, so that is fantastic. A Mighty Blaze was started more than 2 years ago by the fabulous powerhouse team of Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt to keep us together during the pandemic, to keep us talking, to keep us discovering new books and new authors. Just as Luca was saying earlier, it's a way to bring us together when we needed to stay apart. So we are still going strong. And I'm so honored today to bring you from Liverpool, and we will talk about the Beatles, because how can you not? To bring you from Liverpool, Luca Veste and his new book, You Never Said Goodbye. And let me quickly read you Luca's bio, which is not as interesting as what he already said. So he's already told you the underneath part, but I will tell you the cool official bio. Luca Veste is the author of several police procedurals and standalone crime novels, including The Bone Keeper and The Six. If you haven't read those, you should read those. He is the host of Two Crime Writers and a Microphone podcast and the co-founder of the Locked In Festival. He plays bass guitar. The cool guy always played the bass. Don't you think? In the band Fun Lovin' Crime Writers. And if you need a tambourine player, I could probably do that. Or one of those person with the sticks. But not singing. We'll talk about that another time. He lives in Liverpool with his wife and 2 daughters. Now, let me tell you what the Belfast Telegraph said about You Never Said Goodbye. This is rip-roaring, it said, and at times touching, from a writer who has been favorably compared to Harlan Coben and Linwood Barclay. So you totally know what kind of book this is. And rightly so. Heart-pumping action, thoroughly recommended, it says, and a must for everyone who enjoys high-octane thrills. But not just high-octane thrills. There is such a lot of emotion and understory in this, and a lot of texture in this. And lucky you all, Luca and his publisher, The Fabulous Source Books, are giving away a copy of You Never Said Goodbye to one lucky commenter. Oh, the nice
copy.
The real copy, that kind. Well, you're not getting mine anyway. I'm keeping this. I'm totally keeping this. To one lucky commenter. So leave a comment in the comments, like the chat, whatever you call that. And we will pick a winner with the Wheel of Fun at the end of the show. So Luca, before we get to the plot of the story, how would you describe what kind of a book this is? What do you mean it to be?
So the comparisons to Linwood Barclay and Harlan Coben, I mean, like, apart from being, like, incredibly overwhelming, it is that kind of love for those books that made me write this book. So it is that kind of thriller. But I also want to put a huge amount of emotional resonance in it as well, and a lot of heart, because the story is based on something so personal. Because it was so close to it, it was impossible for me not to have that. So basically, I wanted to write a thriller that, you know, kind of had that heart at the core of the plot of and the ability to put yourself in, you know, a reader be able to put themselves in that kind of situation and decide what they would do. Because that's what I do when I write. I read those books, because I'm a huge reader still now, and I always, you know, put myself in those situations. It's an ordinary person in an extraordinary situation. So yeah, it's that kind of thriller with a massive amount of heart. And yeah, I really wanted people to root for Sam, the lead character. So that was basically what I was going for with the book.
Well, let's rewind a little bit, because I know on your Twitter page you talk about that you write about bad things that will probably never happen to you. And I really love that. And if you don't follow Luca on Twitter, please do. Not right now, but when the show is over. But you were remarking earlier that this was inspired by something that did happen to you, although you write about things that probably won't happen to other people. Something like the plot of this book did happen to you. Tell us that story and how that evolved.
So, you know, I talked a little bit about my childhood earlier. When I was 8 years old, my mum left on a Friday, 2 days before Mother's Day. She left the house. It's quite obvious that her and my dad had been having problems, and they announced that she was leaving, and she left. And she was supposed to come back on Mother's Day, and I didn't see her for, I think, around after that. And it's one of those situations where
I think you cut out a little bit. Forgive me, but how old were you, and you didn't see her for how long after that?
So I was 8 years old, and she disappeared for about 6 to 8 months. And you know, eventually we did see her again, and when, you know, she came back into our lives, it was me and a couple of siblings. But I remember sitting at the window waiting for her to come back on Mother's Day. You know, with the card that you made in school, and you know, all that type of thing, and not coming back. And I didn't realize how, when I was growing up, how much this had kind of stuck with me. You know, this moment, until I started writing, basically. And at that it was one of those things where you're looking for ideas for books and stuff like that. And about 10 years ago, I had the idea for this novel of, what if she'd never come back? You know, what if she'd never returned? And how would I have dealt with that? How would I have, would I have been different as an adult? How would, you know, but what if she'd never come back, and then someone told me that, you know, she's been alive all this time and they know the truth? And that's where the idea for the, you know, that's where it was like, okay, now I know what book I'm going to write. But because I'd lived through this, and I'd never really kind of acknowledged it, you know, psychologically, the book then became a really cathartic exercise. Because
about that. Go ahead.
Because it was very much like, you know, exploring a part of myself that I'd never really, you know, looked into before. And you know, myself and my mother now, that we get on fine. It's no problem at all, you know. But you know, there is that undercurrent of, like, you know, the abandonment issues type of thing. This thing has always ran through my life, and I really wanted to write about that. So when I started writing You Never Say Goodbye, it did start in a very different place, and it ended up, you know, in the finalized version, Sam is there when she and watches what happens, so he knows exactly what happened. Or does he know what really happened, because he's so young? Because that was another aspect of it, is I was 8 years old, so I've grown up with this idea that this is what happened. You know, my mum left on the Friday, she didn't come back on the Sunday, I didn't see her for months. So when I started writing this book, I started going back and asking questions of my family. Did this really happen? Turned out it did. I remember it completely well, but there is a chance that I may have got all of that wrong. You know, she may have been gone for 4 hours, and I've just, in my head, extended that time. And that was another part of it, was the way that kind of memory does play tricks on you. You know, it does kind of, you know, make a fool of you sometimes. And that was because it was so based on something so personal. I had never done that before when writing a book. I've never put myself in a book. I've never things from personal life. It's always been the fantastical. It's always been like, what's the latest serial killer in Liverpool type of situation, or, what about this or that? And this was the first time where I've gone, no, this something directly based on personal experience. And
you give me there's so many questions in there, and the reaction is pouring in. I hope you'll take some time now or later to look at the comments from people so admiring and so affectionate. But going back to, we know that as human beings, we also create stories. We create the histories of how we think things are, and we're told things that have from other people of how they want things to be, and what they want us to believe, or what they wish were true, or what they want to be true. And all that sort of comes into this story. Talk a little bit about sort of the creation of a lie, the keeping a lie alive is such a theme in your book, how something was said to be a certain way and then it needs to remain that way, even though it may not be true.
Yeah.
Being really careful here.
I start with the adage that everyone is the hero of their own story. So no one believes that they're doing anything wrong. They believe that everything that they do is for the right cause and is the right way to do it. In that instance, it's their only way, was their way, because they are the hero of their own story. No one believes that in this book, is that any of their actions are incorrect. They've done the best they can with the information and the situation that they were in at the time. So I started with that very central idea. So when they're confronted with outside influences, outside court, things happening, it's like they've now got to then reset and try and work out, like, well, I still couldn't have made a different decision at that time. But it doesn't make anything different. It still makes the lie even worse, because they can't even then apologize for the lie, because it's they still believe that what they did was right. So there's a lot of people holding back in secrets and things like that in the book. But to make sense to me, every character has to believe that what they were doing was right at the time.
And you're so good at motivation. We really, even if we don't agree with what they're doing, we understand why they're doing it, even if it comes from a place of selfishness or greed or power or manipulation, or one's own self-aggrandizement. We get who these people are, and we understand it, and it makes us love Sam all the more. Go back briefly and just give us, if someone said to you, what is this book about? Tell us that, for the people who have not read this. And I know you're all going to run out and get this book when this program is over. You could stop talking right now, Luca, and people would be buying the book. But tell us a little bit about what the plot is.
So Sam Cooper has believed for the last 25 years that his mother died in a car crash in a small town in Connecticut. But when his dad is attacked and left for dead, and he goes to the hospital to be with him for his final moments, his father says to him, "Your mum is still alive. Your mom is still alive," which leads Sam to go to go and find out exactly what's happening. But he's not the only one who's trying to find out what happened to Sam's mum 25 years ago.
And don't worry, you all, that is not a spoiler. That is very early in the book. I think it even says on the back cover.
I think it does, yeah.
And, it's interesting, because even though I knew that was going to happen, and even though everybody knows it's going to happen because there wouldn't be a book otherwise, and it even says so on the cover, the moment that it happens is so chilling that I honestly got goosebumps about it. And I wonder, Shannon Hansen says, I'm definitely checking it out. Of course you are. And Diane Dick says, yes, soul. What was it like that moment? I mean, it's such a brave thing for you to do, to write this book, I think, knowing where it came from. Such a brave thing for you to do, to take the risk to be so vulnerable to yourself, not to mention to the rest of us. But what was it like, that moment that he was told your mom is alive?
It was the moment I was leading to as soon as I started writing, but I knew I had to kind of build up to it. And there's always that worry whenever you're leading up to writing something like that is that you're either gonna get to it too soon and the emotional resonance isn't there, or you wait too long and all of the drama is sucked out of the situation. But I kind of pictured that scene as soon as I started writing the book. I knew exactly what I was going to do, and I knew it was going to be, this moment. And it, from first draft to published novel, it hasn't changed. That scene never changed, because I think I knew exactly what I was going to do with it. And I think, I think it made a difference that you already know at that point that the relationship between Sam and his father has been very strained for the last 20 years. You also know that Sam is in his mid to late 30s, and although seems okay on the surface, I think at that point the reader knows that there is something underlying. That why isn't he settled down? Why is he, seem very lonely and doesn't seem to have anyone to kind of in his life who he can kind of rely on. He's gone back and he doesn't even call anyone before he goes to the hospital to see his father. He doesn't seem to have anyone in his life. So there's also that going on under the surface as well as a reader, where you go, and there's something more to this, and why is he, when he gets to the hospital, he sees his father, the way he is with his father. You all know that it's leading up to something. So, and as I say, it's on the back cover, so you know it's coming. But I think it's still that moment is still a huge moment of like, you've been told one thing for almost your entire life. For someone to flip that on its head, it's like it's an impossible situation to kind of to kind of work out how you would deal with that. And I think all the emotion that he does feel instantly after that is the denial comes in straight away. It's like, it can't be true because I've always believed this thing. And that's where the story really kicks into gear, because he's almost trying to find reasons why it can't be real, and
Which is what you would do. I mean, if you have something that you profoundly and powerfully believe for your entire life, and someone tells you it's not true, your first reaction might be to be defensive. But then that point in the book, which is so resonant and so gorgeous and gaspingly well written, I have to say, does open the door to completely change the rest of what happens to Sam. At that moment, after that moment, that's that domino that starts the entire rest of the story. I can imagine you writing like just typing as fast as you possibly can. It's so exciting and it's so fast paced. Talk a little bit about writing the nonstop action and the suspense and the thrills and you never know what terrifying thing is around the next corner, and that's certainly true in this book.
I mean, because as I said earlier, it says in my bio, I wrote police procedurals, which were, a bit slower paced, but there was always that kind of thriller moment in them as well as you got towards the end. And I've written a couple of psychological thrillers, which were, still in that kind of vein. But this was the first time where there is something always happening. And it's because they needed to have barriers in place constantly to Sam finding out exactly what happened when he was a child. And that came from, I started breaking it down. Scene by scene, where it's, okay, this is the barrier, this is what he's got to overcome. Once he's overcome it, there has to be another thing for him to have to overcome. So it's almost it's like I'm building up. And because it was the first book of this kind that I'd ever written, I did have to get into that kind of real, nuts and bolts of it, where I was writing more notes to myself than I've ever written before, because there was, I was really having to go, no, I'm slowing it down too much here. This is slowing it down, and I need the reader to be as invested as I am in this character, and invested as this character is in finding out what happened. And
this is the kind of book we're talking to you all about. You Never Said Goodbye by Luca Veste. And we're talking about the absolute nonstop pace of it. This is the kind of book that you miss your stop on the subway because you think, I can't wait to find out what happens. And I do think that one of the reasons that suspense works so well is that we care about Sam so much and we want him to find out the truth. So it's an interesting balance between nonstop action, but nonstop emotion. You never use the pace of the book. The pace of the book never eclipses how much we care about what happens. Can you talk a little bit about that balance of emotion and action?
Yeah, I mean, it was something that was it was pivotal for me to write this book, is that I had to be both at the same time. It had to be this really fast-paced page-turning thriller, but also have the heart of it, of this character, this guy who just is desperate to know what people have been keeping from him. They're desperate to know the truth, no matter what it is, and no matter what it means to him. It's that once he starts on this journey, he has to get to the end, and that it's almost because his life has been on hold for 25 years almost. Is that because it was just him and his father left behind, and their relationship is, just withered away over the years. Is he kind of is never really, his life never really started. It never really began after that point.
Yes.
So I had to make sure that was always pivotal. That was always central to it. And I enjoy writing character anyway. So like I've written 7 novels before this, and character has always been so important to me, from the beginning. But because this character was so close to me, in experience and age and likes and dislikes, and kind of, just the sense of him, is that I don't think it was as difficult as I kind of tried to make it, because I just put myself in that position as like, what would I do? And I think because of that, it became more real than anything I'd written before, because this character was just, it was just such a cipher. It was such a, kind of thing. But obviously there is a lot of stuff that happens in the book that, like, just, I probably would, as soon as the first gun I saw, I would have been on the plane back.
Exactly. Well, exactly. But I do think, in fictional Sam, we expect them to do something a little bit bigger than what you and I might actually do. And again, you're so good at motivation. We do understand why Sam makes the decisions that he makes, and we think, yeah, I guess you have to do that. I guess you have to do that. And that's a step that where you take readers so logically. And speaking of the steps, the structure of this book is so gorgeous as well. There's before and now, and there's UK and US. Talk a little bit about, and it's complex, but it's not complicated. It's very easy to understand. Talk a little bit about that structure and why that works so well for you.
Structure was the hardest bit of writing this, changed significantly over time. At first, we never saw Sam's mum's point of view at all in the first 3 or 4 versions of the book. From before, it was all about Sam when he was a child, leading up to the moment that his mom goes missing. So it was as we were going through edits and things like that, we realized that there was this voice that was just completely lost from the narrative of Laurie, Sam's mother. And it was really important to kind of hear what her story leading up to 1995, when the car crash happens. So I thought, well, I've got to go back and I've got to tell her story. But I'd never wanted to overtake the main narrative. So it was always these short kind of vignettes of, like, just that were always something always had to happen in those scenes as well to move the story along. But it's almost in parallel to what's going on as well in the main narrative. That was incredibly difficult to get right, because you are trying to place them then in the book in the right way, in the right time. And this is okay. You can't give that information in straight away. So you got to do it because, like, you need to reveal this character first, and you got to do all that type of thing. You got to Laurie meeting David, Sam's dad, when that happens, and all that type of thing. So getting that right was really difficult. And I'm so glad that you say that, that it worked, because it is still one of my, the only thing I kind of worry about in the book is because it is one of those things that if you get that kind of thing wrong, and the person puts the book down and go, we're back in 1985, I don't need to, I'll come back to that later. You've lost your audience a little bit there. So I was kind of like making sure that A, they were placed correctly in the narrative, and B, something always happens in those scenes that is going to, keep a reader intrigued, interested, and wanting to know what happens next. and then we can go back into the main narrative, and it informs the main narrative as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's, instead of talking about going back, I think where you are is you're in the now of before. And that's where it's not like a flashback. It's you take us back to let us understand how people thought and what was really going on. And that's what illuminates the current time. So instead of it doesn't feel like a flashback in the book. It feels like taking us back to be in the now, as I said, of that time. And I see in the comments everybody saying, "I can't wait to read this," says Susie, says Shannon, says Susie, says Renee. I'm sure it's going to be a wonderful read, says Sherry. And remember, every time you leave a comment, you are entered to win a copy, not this one, of You Never Said Goodbye by Luca Veste. We love Sam so much, but there is a character, couple of them, several of them in this book that are just as devious and selfish and terrible and mean as anybody I have ever read. I mean, like iconically bad. Talk about writing the villain for a moment.
Anthony, who is the main antagonist in the story, he started out, when I started writing the book, it was kind of, almost seedy, gangstery type of, and I never really got a good feel for him. And it wasn't until I started concentrating on each character, which is kind of what I do when I start rewriting and things like that. I'll rewrite with an eye for each individual character that's got a main part in the. So when I started looking at Anthony, it was like, okay, what is who is he and what is his motivations and things like that. And what he became is, he is terrifying because it's so calm, cool, and collected. So he believes that he is, as I say, he's the hero of his own story. So all of his actions are correct. The idea that someone can believe that when he's doing the things that he's doing is it's scary to me. But those people exist. Those kind of psychopaths do exist in the world. They may not be as violent as Anthony can be or make people to be. But those kind of people do exist because, I studied criminology and psychology at university, and I studied that kind of thing quite a lot. Psychopathy is, fascinating to me. So that kind of character traits do exist. And I kind of just poured all of that into that character of that, he believes with all of his soul that everything he does is good. It's fine because it makes his life better.
Yes, that's what I agree. And it's because it makes his life better. It is such a selfish point of view, a self-centered point of view.
Yeah.
That, is it good for Anthony?
The narcissistic personality is completely fascinating to me because it kind of covers so many people. Narcissism kind of is just this concept of is just fascinating to me because I think it covers like the famous actor to the serial killer. They both have similar traits in that they want to be renowned, they want to be known for certain things. One of them is just pretending to be people on screen, and the other is for being evil. And that's fascinating to me. Is so like that kind of narcissism is like what I threw into Anthony is he is the most terrifying kind of character that I've ever written before. Just because
he's terrifyingly realistic. I think Renee was asking in a comment, "Am I going to have nightmares when I read this?" And I don't think so. I don't know. You don't have nightmares during the day about how people are in the world.
Exactly.
It's very realistic.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing is that I've written The Bone Keeper was very much more of a kind of a crime horror crossover where I did want a reader to have nightmares. I did want a reader to flick the light and then run out the room because they're scared of the dark creeping up behind them. That's the kind of book that was. This is very much more insidious in that the idea of, it may make you look at people a little differently, but it's not going to give you nightmares. It'll just make you think a little bit more. You're not going to be waking up in the middle of the night,
right,
worried about him standing at the end of the bed. It's going to make you daydream in the middle of the day. Like, I wonder if that guy who's sitting across from me from the subway has got that kind of thinking going on in his head. And it's like, that's when I've done my job. It's when I've kind of made you think longer than when you're reading. That's brilliant for me. I love that. Because
you've done that. You've done that so gorgeously, and You Never Said Goodbye. I do think that your style is so personal. And you have this sort of, sometimes from time to time, this very staccato style of writing. Was that on purpose? Is that what your voice is? Does that, you'll when you all read this, and I know you're all going to, when you all read You Never Said Goodbye, you'll notice from the beginning that Luca's style is, as I said, it's staccato. It's very fast. It's very hard. It's very pacey. Talk a little bit about pacey. I get to say pacey. Talk a little bit about where that voice comes from you.
I think it comes from, as I said earlier, I was a failed actor. I wanted to be, on stage, on screen. I wanted to do all that. Never managed to get further than, local theatres, and background work in terrible soap operas. But when I write the book and when I read it to myself, so I'll read it out loud, and what I find is that I'll be pausing for emphasis when I'm reading it. So then I'll put that in the book. I hear that voice in my head of me saying these lines almost and then pausing for the emphasis and kind of getting to the point quickly, because you have to do that when you acting and things like that. So that is where the voice comes from, I think, is that. But it's also, I come from an incredibly large family. I'm one of 9 kids. My dad had 23 brothers and sisters. It's huge, cousins, uncles, aunts, you name it, we've got, hundreds. So if you're telling a story in that sense, because that's the only way that you get noticed in a family this size, you have to have a good story and you have to be able to tell it quickly. You have to hold their attention for as little as possible, and then you get to the point, and that's it. And I think that all kind of just comes into the same style of writing. It's because I'm half Italian, I'm half Liverpudlian. It's all very loud, it's very quick-witted. So in order to sound like, you have to be able to do that quickly, and that's the thing, is that I think that just, it's natural. It was always going to be the right way I write, is just that kind of natural way of telling the story, is how I've grown up telling stories to kind of be noticed of this size.
Well, it's interesting because the rhythm of this book, the music of this book, really gets into your head as you're reading it, and your brain starts sort of as like you're learning a new song almost, like the reader is learning a new song, gets in the rhythm of the book, and it's lovely, and it works on so many levels. I wonder whether, I mean, you're a musician, you play the bass, the undercurrent of the song. I wonder, how does music work in with the way that you write? Do you have a playlist? Do you have music on when you write? Do you need it to be quiet? Do you learn from the pace of music, the rhythm of music, how to write a story as well?
Music has been important in my life since I was a child. It was as important as reading, because my dad was a musician. He didn't work, but he was in a lot of bands that didn't get paid. But he did a lot of pub work and all that type of thing. So he kind of had music on all the time, and he would always be, this is the latest song he was going to show me from 30 years previous. So I have a playlist when I'm writing. I can't write without music playing. There is actually a playlist for this book that they put together. I think it's on Spotify. I don't have a link to hand, but there was a number of songs that I was thinking of when I was writing this book, and I would literally just put on repeat. And I would just have that song in certain scenes just going on and on and on while I'm writing.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but can you tell us any of them?
So when the scene in the hospital with his father, there's a song called "The Living Years" by Mike and the Mechanics, which was big over here. I don't know if it ever made it over to the States, but it's very much a song where it's a son talking to his dad about not having enough time to tell him everything that he wants to be able to tell him. And it's that I love a song that tells a story. I love concept albums, like those albums where they tell an entire, narrative throughout. And that's a lot of the music I listen to. But my music taste will range from 50s to modern day. And I have a huge playlist of, I think it's about 600 or 700 songs now, and they'll just be on constant rotation while I'm writing. But then, there will be scenes where a song will be just while I'm writing that scene over and over again. It's like, that type of thing. But it is important to me because, there's a song called Music by John Miles. Music was my first love and it'll be my last. I think that's probably true for me. It's that music has been such a big, massive part of my life that I think, it has become really important. And I do use music when I'm writing. And thankfully, like I was in a number of bands that, failed when I was a teenager. But thankfully now, I'm in a band, which is just fun. It's just a real fun thing to do. And what I discovered was that there was a lot of writers who have that kind of love of music, who do kind of, like you use music as like it's like a muse, it's like a kind of like it's an inspiration, and it's I do know a lot of writers who also need complete silence to write, or they'll need the background noise of a coffee shop or something. But for me, music, sat at my desk, music on, and I'm in my happy place then.
Oh, that's such a nice picture to imagine. I sort of imagine this as Bruce Springsteen meets John Lennon.
Bruce Springsteen's The River. That was a song that I was listening to a lot. The River.
Oh, I bet so. I bet so. That is gorgeous. And he, that understanding of how the world should work and doesn't work, and truth and reality and emotion and loss, and grief, and despair, all those book things. Are music things too. So yeah, I loved this book. Margaret in the back room is saying it's question time. I do want to ask one final question from me, and then we'll take questions from the audience. Oh my golly, yes, we're taking up too much time. Sorry, you're just too good. You're just too good.
I'm sorry.
I wonder if you look at the world after having written this, whether the experience of writing it changed the way you now look at your world.
Definitely. I think now that, like, when I was talking earlier about what happened with my mum, and that is, when that happened, she was 10 years younger than I am now. And I think I didn't really know what I was doing in my late 20s. I barely know what I'm doing in my late 30s. So it gave me a bit of an appreciation of what, the narrative that my dad had, the narrative that she had, the narrative that I had. And it made me kind of more open to hearing other people's versions of the same story. And I think that was something that kind of really helped me kind of, move on from what happened. And, I do have a good relationship with her now. And it's, she's an excellent grandmother. And she, if I ask her for anything, she's there. She's one of the, she's, if I need anything, I know I can just call her and she'll be there. It's not, she might not be the first person I call, but I know that is the case. But it has given me kind of like that moment of kind of going, okay, do you know what? I can deal with this now. I know what was kind of bubbling inside my head for all these years, and having written this now, it is a very fast-paced, tense thriller with a lot of guns and a lot of people getting shot and blah blah blah. Oh, car crashes and everything going on. But at its heart, it is about a guy having his world flipped over. That's what it's about, and that is what comes through. I think in the plot is that it's a very ordinary person, just in an extraordinary situation.
And extraordinarily written by You Never Said Goodbye by Luca Veste. And let's take a couple of quick questions now, as Luca and I have gone on way too long, but it's just, you've been so generous and wonderful. And this has just been so incredibly interesting. Renee says, are any of your siblings younger than you? They want to know about your family. And did you discuss the situation with your siblings and your mother? Did she read the book?
So, weirdly, my mother is one of the very few people in my family who actually read all of my books. She's always read them from the first one to this one. And she absolutely loved this book and has absolutely no idea where the inspiration for the book came from.
No,
she doesn't know. And it's not something that I would ever discuss with her, because it's about me and it's about my situation. And I don't need to lay that on her now. I don't need to do that. I am the second oldest, but my older sister was from my father's first marriage, and she's not. We're not especially close. She's not. She's not around all the time. So I'm de facto the oldest one. It's to the younger ones. So when they found out, a few of them found out about what this book is about, and especially the ones who we share parents with. They were very reticent about me telling the story. They were very worried. Mainly because they didn't want they didn't want acrimony. To, they didn't want any kind of, like we've all kind of moved on. We're all kind of happy. And I said, listen, and I explained to them what my thinking was, and that, I needed to do this, and I thought it was a good idea, and that doesn't always come easy to us. But once they got to know that, she liked it, it's all been fine. And it's really, that's a good thing about being the oldest, is that, I can just turn around and say, listen, you gotta just pipe down, or,
No, I'm the oldest too. I have said that. I definitely, my mother, I wrote something about one of my main characters' mothers in a book. And my mother was really angry. And she said, that's me. That's me. You've put me in your book. And I said, no, Mom, Charlie McNally, the main character, is a fictional character. And Mrs. McNally is a fictional character. Mrs. McNally is not you. And my mother says, oh, don't be silly, dear. Of course she is. And she was right. It was her, but it was fine. It all turned out to be fine. We use what we have.
Exactly. And that's the thing, is that, there's no, even though Sam is as close to me as I'll probably ever write a character to be, in so many ways he's different to me as well. It is just a launch pad for that idea of abandonment, of just like, of being left behind, of something happening and you not being in control of the situation.
And everybody's experienced that. There's no question about that. Let's take 2 more questions really quickly. 2 more questions. I know we have a million of them in the list. What language tics did you have to excise to set it in Connecticut? Yeah, it is in Connecticut, you all. And that is, I know the Mystic Bookstore helped you with this. You gave a little shout out to them.
The trip that Sam takes in the book, where he flies into Boston and then gets the Amtrak down to Mystic, I did that trip. I'd set 7 novels outside my house in Liverpool. So when I was writing this book and I knew it needed to be on a much larger canvas and I wanted it to be, set in the States and the UK, I thought, well, this is my first chance to actually go on a research trip where I don't just walk out the front door and just walk around the block, and that's it. I could go somewhere further out. So I did this thing where I kind of just wanted to experience everything that Sam would experience, but more. So I flew into Boston, got the Amtrak down to Mystic, which was a place that I kind of picked after looking at just thousands of different places in the Northeast, and yeah, it kind of worked. And I'd seen Mystic Pizza, 20 years ago.
Well, okay.
But it just had that vibe that I kind of wanted, and I went down, and yeah. So the bookstore is in the center of town, but the town is an incredibly strange place. It's difficult because it's probably more normal for those in America, but for me, everything is so spread out in America. In the UK, we have our cities. Everything seems to clump around the cities. We have big, massive range of countryside, and then another city where we're all sitting on top of each other again. With the States, everyone kind of just spread out a little bit. So I like that kind of thing. So that was one of the first things that I noticed, is that was the difference that Sam would experience of like distance, is that nothing's really walkable because your sidewalks kind of just finish. They just stop all of a sudden. and
it's funny because I was talking to Lisa Jewell, and she had exactly the same response. She says, your sidewalks just stop.
Yeah, just I'm walking down there, I'm like that, just enjoying myself, and there's like, there's 3 lanes of traffic going right next to me, but it's okay, and then it will just finish, it just stops, and that's it, you're just like in the middle of nowhere. That's great. But the other thing that I did while I was there was I talked to as many people as I could, because I needed to find out this. Look, Google Street View is fantastic, but it's only shows you the surface. When I went there, I was like, so the first night I was there, I was in the diner next to the hotel. The motel that's in the book is where I stayed. The diner next door is where I ate every night. I spoke to the waitresses. I spoke to, there was a bar over the road. I went and spoke to the guys over there, and I would strike up conversations. One of the best things about the States for me was that, especially for Mystic, is that everyone was willing to. No one thought it was a strange thing.
No, everybody wants to help, as you say.
Yeah.
No, everybody wants to be in the book. Come on,
And
except
I went to the bookstore, and when I told them what I was doing, they were so happy about it. They were so like, really, you're going to do it? Okay, great. And so they gave me a lot of information, and they told me certain things like, military personnel, ex-military they all lived in this part of the place, and all that kind of information that may end up as half a sentence in the book, but it adds that real local flavor. But when it comes to language and the way that they talk and interact, I mean, I've watched a lot of American TV. I mean, and it does inform, and it does help a lot. And they're probably. I was waiting for the first edit to come back from my US publisher of like, these are all the things that you got wrong. But thankfully, there wasn't anything,
Thank goodness for television. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We are happy to provide. One last question, because we are so out of time. This is complete craziness. If someone says, Margaret in the back room, says, if someone wanted to make a UK trip with book festivals in mind, and I know you are an expert, Luca, which would you recommend hitting?
So I can see Crime Writers of Cymru. Yeah, I mean, that's great. And my favourites are Bloody Scotland, which is a crime festival that takes place in a town called Stirling in Scotland every year. That is one of the best festivals I think ever, because it's not only about just the normal panel conversations where it's 4 people up there talking about a certain type of genre. They'll do different things. Like this year, they've done it every year. They had a crime writers football match, soccer match. They had a quiz. They had, I did a few different things that'll be on next year where it's like game shows and stuff like that. So that's a lot of fun because you really bring an audience in, not just to talk about the books, but also the authors as well. They get to hear about us and things like that. And the other one is I think it's the biggest in Europe, which is Theakston's Old Peculiar Crime Festival, which takes place in Harrogate in July every year, which just has the biggest names in the genre from all over the world. It takes place at the Swan Hotel, which is where Agatha Christie famously went missing for 10 days. That's where she was found.
That's my goal the goal in my life is to go to Harrogate. I hope they invite me someday.
I'm sure they will.
We need to go, you all. We need to give away a copy. Luca needs to go to sleep for a little while. It's 10 o'clock at night there. We will give away Source Books, the fabulous Source Books. We'll give away a copy of You Never Said Goodbye. One of these lucky winners, we will spin the wheel of fun. In the back room, you can see that it is random because sometimes a Mighty Blaze wins, which we don't allow to happen. That shows you that it's random. And the winner is Janine Woodworth. That is so great. Janine is such a veteran pal of Crime Time, and we are thrilled that Janine has won a copy of You Never Said Goodbye. Hooray.
Janine will be getting this exact copy. I will write it to Janine, and I'll send it. I'll post it. I'll show it myself.
That exact copy. That is. Then she can see. You can all see on Crime Time in our on YouTube and on Facebook. I hope you watch on YouTube as well. You can watch this interview anytime you want. Janine says I could listen to him all day. I could listen to him all day. And everybody is saying congratulations. You just about did listen to him all day. Supposed to last for 40 minutes, but it was so irresistible. Luca, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It has for me too. Thank you. Now, let me just, before you go, tell you all next week at 3 and 4 ET, you will not believe who we have. At 3 o'clock, and I can barely say this to you, at 3 o'clock, we have Anthony Horowitz with his new book, The Twist of a Knife. He is one of the most brilliant, meta, gorgeous. His brain is amazing. You know, I'm going to gush like crazy. You're going to have to stop me from gushing over Anthony Horowitz when he's here. 3 o'clock ET next Tuesday. And then at 4 o'clock, Claire McIntosh talking about, I know, Luca, talking about The Last Party. So you all Crime Timers, you will not want to miss the show next Tuesday at 3 and 4 p.m. And today I had the great honor of chatting with Luca Veste, whose new book, You Never Said Goodbye, is just out in the United States. And if you did not win, if you are not Janine, everyone who is not Janine, please go purchase this book right away. No pressure. It's just Luca's career. Luca. Good luck with this book and forever. And I hope you will come back and talk to us very soon.
Anytime. Thank you so much for having me.
My complete pleasure. You all, my complete pleasure talking with you as well. And I hope you will continue to join us here on Crime Time. And until then, remember, it is always safe inside a book. And we will see you next time.